All right. So we're out here today enjoying the woods. Lovely little area uh, near San Marcos, Texas. Is one of the little nature parks around there. They've got lovely mountain bikers going by. Some nice bits of trail. Very rocky, as you can see. Is going to be a little bit of an interesting time walking and talking here, just so I don't trip and fall on my face over one of these. So we'll keep an eye on that as well. Anyway, today's topic, going back on kind of the transhumanist angle and looking also at some of the fantasy elements. So today we're going to talk about transhumanism in My Little Pony. Yes, we're going to do one of the more interesting and out there ones and have a good time with it. Because My Little Pony does provide a lot of interesting ways to look at transhumanism and elements of advanced approaches to improving our condition through the use of technology, or in their case, mostly magic. Because that's what you're using. But of course, as a famous saying goes, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So while we're, talking on the sci-fi side or the science side about how we're going to manipulate cells or change humans and sing them through teleporters in order to get them places, they're doing basically the same thing in My Little Pony. They're just using magical effects in order to achieve that, which, of course, is going to be a very effective way to achieve certain transhuman features, like the first one we're going to look at, which is the changelings and their ability to mutate, to transform, to shapeshift, to alter their very being almost at a whim. It's really quite an impressive feat, and if we were to think about it in scientific terms as we understand it now, the amounts of energy required would be absurd. But of course, we're doing magic, so let's consider, how that applies to a little bit of the world and the philosophy here. Because of course, the changelings start out as a villain species, essentially. All of them are looked at with trepidation because they like to feed on the emotions, the positive emotions, specifically love, of all of the other races around. And they're pretty good at it, although they are often found to be quite hungry, because of course you're not getting a lot of love if you're going and stealing it and zapping it, which is one of the things they get into in the series. But it goes and points back to the interesting perspectives that a lot of people have on the idea of changing shape. That it is something to be concerned about, and those who are doing it and cannot be pinned down are considered to be not just unnatural, but potentially hazardous, because they don't have a clear identity, or they cannot be easily identified and managed. Well, if one can constantly change your shape, how do you ever manage something as simple as keeping tabs on someone? You think about something like the typical identity documents that people carry around. And what a photo ID? Well, that becomes almost meaningless if you can change your shape at will. Sure, there's a baseline shape, but nothing in My Little Pony suggests that you can immediately and easily force a changeling to revert their shape. They do it voluntarily all the time, and it is in fact considered somewhat rude to change it outside. Maybe that's one of the ways you get around this. You start with the social aspects that you can really play with and say, look, okay, we're going to keep social pressure on to make sure that people are behaving themselves and being what their baseline form is, or some particular one that is socially acceptable, almost like clothing, the way we think about it. You're not supposed to go out wearing specific things that give people a little bit worked up. Certainly, and certain forms or certain clothing items are much more popular in given situations. If you wear a ski mask walking down the street in the middle of summer, you're going to get some very negative responses. Some people are going to be very curious, and of course you're just going to be hot and unhappy with it. But the social pressure will certainly be there. Whereas, of course, if you wear it, for skiing, or even just out in the middle of a cold winter, you're going to get a lot less negative feedback. People are going to be much more accepting and understanding. They're going to be, this is what you should do. This is what it's for. And they will, therefore, be much more agreeable with that particular clothing choice. So it goes with a lot of the shape-shifting and forms that are chosen. And we can look at that as we start to develop more technologies related to some of the ability to change forms for humans. We'll be able to shift our shape effectively in different ways. We're starting to see some of that already, of course. People occasionally get facial surgery that alters different things. Certainly the ability to deal with things like aging is becoming ever more popular and consistent. And we're finding ways to keep up with that, because it's not going that fast yet. But as it increases and becomes more and more common, we're going to have to look to ideas like this and consider things like changelings in order to better conceive of how we want to deal with that. The other aspect of transformation in My Little Pony is, all the other species that aren't necessarily natural shape changers, don't have, or at least don't have as many forms or go as fast. I mean, a good look at Kieran, who switched to being Neeric on a dime whenever they happen to get angry enough or lose their emotions. Something definitely to be thinking about in terms of transhuman perspective when we're going to be shape-shifting or having different perspective. How is that shape affecting or affected by our emotional state? We have to be very cognizant of the mind-body duality. You can't say in really either way that the mind is a plaything of the body or the body is a plaything of the mind solely. They both interact back and forth constantly and in important ways that are going to ensure that we have to constantly be managing that effectively. So, if the body is going to respond to mental states, that's an interesting one to look at in a very visceral and direct way. But most of them are more like what we see when we actually change some of the main characters. It's actually remarkably rare in the series, given how easy it seems to be. They can, be transformed effectively, given wings, or turned into entirely different species with specific spells and capabilities, or sometimes just using magical devices. They can flip them back and forth, much like we see with the hippogriff species that like to go between being sea ponies and flying ponies. So you have the case that this just doesn't get used that much. It's kind of an interesting perspective, because you have these things floating around and people just aren't using them despite the obvious and inherent utility that they possess. You could easily start flapping your wings and have a great time, go to the skies, much like Rarity does. Of course, we have a bit of a repeat of the Icarus situation in that case, when you get a little too close to the sun flying high. That's something always to keep in mind, that you have to know the limitations of whatever form you're taking and really study up on it before you go out there, or else you're going to put yourself and others potentially in danger. It's fundamentally the same as any sport. If one is going to go scuba diving, you really should understand the fundamentals of how pressure works, how much air you're going to have, how long you can dive in a specific depth, what altitude you're going in at. Make sure that you know you're with someone. All these sorts of things are important, and as we start to pick up more capabilities, that sort of thing is going to come along with it. It's just like we're doing with current technology. I mean, it's all that scuba gear, and you have to learn these things before you go out and put it to use if you want to do it safely and effectively. And, well, most people do. It's a good idea not to, be too reckless, even if the opportunity is afforded. You should, learn to step back and evaluate what you can or should do and how much you need to learn before you go out and try it. But there may be other reasons besides being a little bit concerned that they don't do it all that often. And of course, a little bit of this comes back to the writing. They just didn't think about it. But I would suggest that there's probably something going on in that case regarding the ability to just kind of do things more directly, not having to worry about switching forms. For the changeling, sure, it's natural, that's what they do. But for most of the pony folk around, if you're constantly switching it up, having to try and learn and deal with things, a different perspective, a different form, there can be challenges involved in that. Much as we saw when they became breezy, is that they literally got blown away. The wind will pick you up and push you in ways that are not very healthy, very easy to succeed with. And that's would have been, much easier, or it is much easier if you don't have to deal with those particular limitations. And if you know exactly what your limits are, if you've trained for years in one particular form, one particular set of skills and limitations, you know where those are at. You don't have to learn it all over again. You don't have to try and pick it up or solve it again every time. Because if you're constantly trying to shapeshift to deal with the next problem, you've got a whole new set of capabilities and limitations and concerns and opportunities that you have to work through at the same time you're trying to solve whatever problem is in front of you. And that is definitely going to put a crimp in your ability to solve whatever problem is in front of you. You do not want to have to deal with that situation suddenly cropping up and making life difficult. So, anyway, you retain your normal form. You go about doing what you could, even if you have the fundamental capability to solve that particular issue, maybe by transforming into something. They're just more negatives than positives sometimes, and perhaps in a lot of cases. So that's enough for today. A little bit of fantasy into there. A little bit of fun playing around with that concept. I will look to have another chat with you later. We'll definitely have to talk about more aspects of transhumanism and fantasy. Obviously, we just did some basic transformation stuff in MLP today. It'd be great to talk about teleportation sometime, or perhaps looking at magic power management. And we'll get on with that in the future. I will look forward to chatting with you then. And as always, if you have any ideas, suggestions, something you'd like to discuss or hear me ramble about for whatever reason, please do leave a message about that, and I will chat about it. Catch you next time.